The brass bell above Morrison's general store clanged with bitter finality as Evangeline Thorne stepped inside, her father's faded blue military jacket hanging loose around her thin frame. The wool had worn thin at the elbows, and the brass buttons had long since lost their shine, but she pulled it tighter against the October chill that seemed to follow her everywhere these days. Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through the warm air like a blade. "That girl thinks she's something special, wearing that old coat like it makes her better than the rest of us." The other women clustered near the fabric display turned to stare, their eyes taking in Eva's patched skirt and worn boots with undisguised contempt. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button because what happens next will blow your mind. Eva kept her chin high as she approached the counter where Samuel Morrison stood counting coins. She needed flour, beans, and if she was fortunate, perhaps some salt to see her through the coming week. The small coins in her palm represented her last bit of money from mending Mrs. Patterson's quilts. Morrison barely glanced up from his ledger. "We don't extend credit to drifters, Miss Thorne. Perhaps you should consider more suitable employment than playing seamstress to ladies who can afford better work." The words stung worse than the mountain wind. Eva's fingers tightened around the coins, but before she could respond, the door burst open with such force that the bell nearly flew from its mounting. A massive figure filled the doorway, broad shoulders blocking the afternoon light. Sergeant Major Tobias McKenna stepped inside, his weathered face scanning the room with the careful assessment of a man who had survived too many battles. His dark eyes swept over the gossiping women, paused on Morrison's sneering face, then settled on the young woman at the counter. The moment his gaze fell upon her jacket, everything changed. His breath caught audibly, and his hand instinctively moved to his chest where old scars lay hidden beneath his shirt. The faded blue wool, the tarnished buttons, but most of all the small rectangular patch sewn carefully above the left breast pocket made his heart pound like cannon fire. 14th Pennsylvania Infantry, the same regiment that had charged up that blood-soaked hill at Antietam Creek while he lay wounded, watching helplessly as Lieutenant James Thorne led 20 men to save his fallen unit. McKenna moved forward like a man walking through a dream, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. The store fell silent except for the tick of Morrison's clock and the whisper of autumn whined through the eaves. Eva stepped back instinctively as this giant of a man approached, but his eyes held no threat, only a strange mixture of pain and wonder. "That jacket," he said quietly, his voice rough as gravel. "Where did you get it?" Eva's chin lifted with the stubborn pride that had carried her through months of loneliness. "It belonged to my father, Lieutenant James Thorne. He died at Antietam." The words hit McKenna like a physical blow. His hand gripped the counter's edge until his knuckles went white. "James Thorne. Sweet merciful God, you're Jimmy's daughter." Morrison shifted impatiently behind the counter, but McKenna's presence commanded the room like a storm front. The sergeant's eyes never left Eva's face as memories crashed over him. Lieutenant Thorne charging through Confederate fire to reach the wounded. Thorne's voice shouting orders while bullets whistled overhead. Thorne falling with blood spreading across his blue coat, but not before he had pulled McKenna and 3 others to safety behind the stone wall. "Your father saved my life," McKenna whispered. The revelation hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. Eva stared at this weathered stranger who spoke her father's name with such reverence, while the store's other occupants watched with barely concealed curiosity. McKenna reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch, counting out coins with deliberate precision. "Whatever she needs," he told Morrison, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Put on my account." Eva's face flushed red as prairie sun set. "I don't need charity," she said firmly, though her empty stomach betrayed her with a soft rumble. McKenna's weathered features softened. "This isn't charity, miss. It's a debt. Your father saved more than my life that day. He saved my soul." Morrison grudgingly began gathering supplies while McKenna studied Eva with the careful assessment he once used to evaluate battlefields. Her worn clothing spoke of genuine hardship, but her straight spine and steady gaze revealed the same courage that had driven her father into enemy fire. "Where are you staying?" McKenna asked gently. Eva hesitated, knowing how her answer would sound. "The old Garrett cabin, about 3 miles north of town." McKenna's jaw tightened. That place has been abandoned for 2 years. No proper roof, no decent well. The wind picked up outside, rattling the store windows as McKenna made his decision. "I have a ranch 5 miles west of here. Good land, sturdy buildings. I need someone to help with the house. cooking, mending. It's honest work with fair pay and a decent room. Eva's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Why would you offer work to a stranger? Because you're not a stranger, McKenna replied quietly. You're the daughter of the bravest man I ever knew. Jimmy Thorne would roll over in his grave if he knew his girl was living in that broken-down cabin. Mrs. Henderson sniffed loudly from the fabric counter. Improper arrangement, if you ask me. Young woman living alone with a bachelor, especially one with his reputation. McKenna's voice turned cold as winter steel. Nobody asked you, ma'am, and my reputation was earned fighting for this country while better men than me died in the mud. Eva watched this exchange with growing fascination. No one had defended her honor in months. Yet this massive stranger stood ready to face down the town's disapproval for her sake. She thought of her father's stories about military brotherhood, about soldiers who became family through shared sacrifice. I accept your offer, she said quietly, her decision surprising even herself. But I'll earn my keep fairly. The McKenna Ranch sprawled across a valley where golden aspens trembled in a mountain breeze. Eva stood in the doorway of the sturdy log house, marveling at walls that didn't leak and windows with actual glass. The interior spoke of a man who valued function over finery, but everything was well made and carefully maintained. Your room is upstairs, McKenna said, carrying her meager belongings. The previous housekeeper left some dresses that might fit. No shame in wearing what's practical. Eva nodded gratefully, though part of her wondered about this previous woman who had left so completely. Over the following days, she discovered McKenna's quiet rhythms. He rose before dawn to tend his cattle, returning for breakfast that she learned to prepare over the great stone hearth. He spoke little during meals, but his eyes often lingered on her father's jacket when she wore it. One evening, as autumn rain drummed against the roof, McKenna finally broke his usual silence. Tell me about Jimmy, he said softly. What was he like when he wasn't being a soldier? Eva smiled, her first genuine smile in months. He carved little animals from pine wood. Always had his hands busy when he was thinking. He used to say that keeping your hands moving kept your heart steady. McKenna's hands stilled over the leather he was mending. Your father had that same habit, always whittling during the quiet hours between battles. Made me a little horse once, said it would bring me luck. The intimacy of shared memory settled between them like warmth from the fire. Eva found herself studying McKenna's scarred hands, wondering what stories they held. When she brought him coffee, their fingers brushed briefly, and neither pulled away immediately. But their growing closeness did not go unnoticed. On Sunday morning, as Eva walked to the general store for supplies, she felt the weight of watching eyes. Conversations stopped abruptly when she passed, and Mrs. Henderson's voice carried clearly from the church steps. Living in sin, mark my words. That girl has no shame, and McKenna should know better at his age. Eva's cheeks burned, but she kept walking. When she returned to the ranch, McKenna took one look at her face and set down his tools. What happened? Nothing I can't handle, she replied, but her voice trembled slightly. McKenna's jaw tightened. The talk is getting worse, isn't it? Maybe I should take you to the minister. Make this arrangement more official. Eva's heart leaped and sank simultaneously. You mean marriage? For appearance's sake? The words hung between them like a blade waiting to fall. Eva's heart hammered against her ribs as she searched McKenna's weathered face for something beyond duty and obligation. Before either could speak, the sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, their eastern clothes and rigid postures marking them as strangers to mountain country. The lead rider, a thin man with calculating eyes, dismounted with obvious distaste for the rural setting. Miss Evangeline Thorne? I am Harold Whitman, your late mother's cousin. We've come to collect you. Eva stepped back instinctively, finding herself closer to McKenna's solid presence. I don't know you, and I'm not going anywhere. Whitman's smile held no warmth. Your situation here has become quite the scandal back in Philadelphia, living unchaperoned with a man of questionable reputation. We have legal authority to remove you from this inappropriate arrangement. McKenna moved forward, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. The lady said she's not going. Whitman's companions shifted nervously, but he pressed on. Sergeant McKenna, isn't it? Court-martialed for insubordination, if I recall. Hardly suitable company for a young woman of breeding. The accusation hit like a physical blow, and Eva saw something die in McKenna's eyes. That night, after Whitman and his men retreated to town with threats of legal action, Eva found McKenna standing alone in the barn, staring at nothing. The revelation of his court-martial had stripped away the confidence she had come to admire, leaving behind a man who looked defeated. "It's true," he said without turning around. "I disobeyed a direct order. My commanding officer wanted to abandon wounded men, said they were beyond saving. I went back for them anyway." Eva stepped closer, her heart aching for the pain in his voice. "You saved lives, and got myself thrown out of the only family I'd ever known." McKenna's shoulders sagged. Maybe Whitman is right. Maybe you deserve better than a disgraced soldier living on borrowed land. The words ignited something fierce within Eva. She moved around to face him, her eyes blazing with the same fire that had driven her father into battle. "Don't you dare," she said firmly. "Don't you dare let those people convince you that honor makes you unworthy." "But what can I offer you?" he asked desperately. "I have nothing but this ranch and a name tarnished by scandal." Eva reached up and touched his scarred cheek. "You offer me the same thing my father did. A heart that chooses what's right over what's easy." Dawn broke gray and determined as Eva prepared for what might be her final stand. She dressed carefully in her father's jacket, its worn fabric now feeling like armor against the coming battle. McKenna waited by the horses, his jaw set with newfound resolve. They rode into town together, past curious faces and whispered conversations. At the courthouse, Whitman waited with his legal papers and satisfied smirk. But as they dismounted, unexpected allies emerged from the crowd. Doc Patterson stepped forward first, his medical bag in hand. "I treated this man's wounds when he first came to our valley," he announced loudly. "Never met a more honorable soul. If he vouches for Miss Thorne, that's good enough for me." Old Mrs. Chun, whose son had died at Gettysburg, moved beside them. "This girl mended my quilts with hands gentle as prayer. Any fool can see she's good people." One by one, townspeople McKenna had helped over the years stepped forward. The widow whose roof he'd repaired, the farmer whose cattle he'd saved from wolves, the children he'd taught to ride. Even Morrison appeared, clutching a war newspaper clipping about Lieutenant Thorne's heroism at Antietam. Whitman's confident expression began to waver as the crowd swelled around Eva and McKenna, their voices rising in unified support. The courthouse steps became an impromptu gathering as more voices joined the chorus of support. Judge Morrison, Samuel's older brother, emerged from his chambers with weathered dignity. He had served in the war himself and recognized the newspaper clipping detailing Lieutenant Thorne's heroism. "Mr. Whitman," the judge said firmly, "your legal authority extends only to matters of genuine concern for Miss Thorne's welfare. This community testifies to her excellent character and circumstances." Whitman's face reddened as his carefully laid plans crumbled. "But the impropriety, the scandal." "What scandal?" interrupted Reverend Walsh, stepping forward with his wife at his side. "I see a young woman of virtue being protected by an honorable man. If they wish to marry, I'll perform the ceremony myself." McKenna turned to Eva, his eyes questioning and hopeful. The crowd quieted, sensing the importance of the moment. Eva looked at this man who had defended her honor, who carried her father's memory with reverence, who chose courage over comfort at every turn. "Yes," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the square. "I'll marry you, Tobias McKenna. Not for appearances or legal protection, but because I love you." The crowd erupted in cheers as McKenna swept her into his arms, spinning her around while her father's jacket fluttered like a banner of victory. 3 weeks later, autumn sunlight streamed through the church windows as Eva walked down the aisle, wearing her father's military jacket over a simple white dress. The congregation that had once whispered about her now stood in respectful silence, witnessing the union of two wounded souls who had found healing in each other. McKenna waited at the altar, his own military dress uniform polished to perfection. When Eva reached him, he gently touched the faded regimental patch over her heart. "Jimmy would be proud," he whispered. Reverend Walsh spoke of love conquering adversity, of honor transcending circumstance. We pronounced them husband and wife. McKenna's kiss was tender and reverent, sealing a promise that went deeper than mere words. At the reception, Doc Patterson raised his glass high. "To Lieutenant James Thorne, whose courage lives on in his daughter, and to Sergeant McKenna, whose honor saved them both." The toast echoed through the hall as Eva and McKenna danced their first dance as husband and wife. She still wore the jacket that had started everything, now understanding that true worth wasn't measured by others' opinions, but by the courage to love and be loved in return. Have you ever found belonging in unexpected places? Share your story of acceptance in the comments below.